T minus 30 seconds.
Just because I just checked, it was not out earlier this afternoon at 3:55 p.m. Governor Hochul extended the state of emergency through July 14th, 2022, which would apply to remote meetings. I'll send something out to council later tomorrow.
Thank you, Sharon. Should I announce that or
Yeah,
just leave it?
I'd leave it. I mean, that's up to you, Councilman.
No. When I stop listening to attorneys is the day that I should just stop. You guys are the smart people in the room. All right, is everyone ready?
Yes.
Are we good? All right. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to the meeting 2 for code discussion of the Municipal and Public Affairs Committee of the City Council of the City of Binghamton. It is Tuesday, June 14th, 2022, 5:15 p.m. Please stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, everyone. Good evening. The clerk will call the roll.
Okay. Councilwoman Resnetti,
Present.
Councilwoman Riley,
Present.
and Chairman Scaringi.
Present.
So those are the 3 MPA members. And then for our other council members, we have Councilwoman Friedman is here. And it looks like that's it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Clerk. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Councilwoman Friedman, thank you for joining us as well. Thanks to the Court Counsel, Clerk, Deputy Clerk, and President Strawn, who is joining us as well. Good evening, Mr. President. So with that being said, our last MPA committee meeting, we discussed 2 broad topics with respect to quality of life issues, code processes and procedures, time, resources, and money. Our next meeting, meeting number 3, will focus on rental registry and code models. And this evening, we will be having some broad discussions concerning housing standards and vacant properties and slumlords and tenant responsibilities. So with respect to that, I will follow the same kind of logistical procedure that I did last time, which is to kind of take each of those 2 respective broader topics, and we can kind of isolate them, if you will, half and half. Obviously, there might be some overlap, which of course is not a problem, but just to kind of keep some order as we go with things. And so the first one will be in the order that we aggregated them: housing standards and vacant properties. Some of the sub-bullets that we had discussed concerning this broader context were a housing coordinator with the Corp Council office. We know that this is something that Mayor Cram and the Binghamton City Council have already been in some first round, if you will, discussions concerning, as well as members of Corp Council and their office. Number 2, how can we more effectively deal with vacant properties owned by banks? Number 3, imminent life safety code issues. How can code enforcement be preventative and not just punitive? And the last sub bullet under this section was, how can we better deal with a property's internal code related issues? And a simple way to kind of compartmentalize that would be actual safety concerns versus not just the aesthetic issues that we as residents might more plainly see from, say, for example, the external view of a home, not just the code issues related to internal factors as well. So with that being said, under the housing standards and vacant properties bullet, those were kind of the 4 sub bullets. And that being said, I'll open it to the floor. Any council members who want to offer anything with respect to this area or bring up any thoughts or anything like that?
This is Councilwoman Riley. Thank you, Chair Scaringi.
Please.
Let me go back in terms of processes. So we had a meeting that was very robust in nature. There were tons of thoughts and concepts shared. Were there minutes from that meeting?
Yes.
Okay. And where were those minutes presented?
They weren't presented. As we discussed at our last meeting. We are going through the first 3 rounds. I think it was Councilman Burns who actually suggested, when we had our final level discussions, that if further meetings were needed, that we would take those, which of course is our agency and right to do. And once the 3 initial meetings are brought together where everything is encapsulated, that I'll be more than happy to provide that PDF to everyone.
Okay, I think though, as committee members, at least amongst the 3 of us, it would be beneficial to have those notes so that we kind of command or steer the conversation so that we're not duplicative in our efforts, but we can still together highlight areas that are not as comprehensively discussed, so that when we plan the meetings in the future, we all have the data to say, well, you know what, on day 1, this is what occurred, but I'd like to go back and further discuss this information. And I think, again, as committee members, we probably should have that moving forward.
No, that's fine. I appreciate that, Mr. Clerk. Just to get on the record that Councilman Burns is here with us as well. And again, the whole concern of duplication, which is an understandable one, is largely alleviated by compartmentalizing it categorically, like we are through these first 3 meetings. But if you would like those, minutes earlier on, sure, that's not a problem.
Absolutely. And I do want to just comment that some of the categories are subjective, right? And they can be duplicative just in its tone. So for example, we're talking code in the 3rd meeting, but code is highly mentioned in this meeting as well. So I just want to make sure that when we further delineate the bullets, that again, we have those previous notes and minutes so that we can kind of reduce the duplication as we proceed. That's all.
No, I appreciate that. Again, like I had said, I'm just following what we had unanimously agreed upon earlier, but if you'd like those minutes up now, that's fine too. That's not a problem. Anyone like to get anything off on a substantive level with what we're discussing today? Again, starting off with housing standards and vacant property. Councilwoman Friedman, please.
Thank you, Councilman Stringy. So one thing that I believe that this would fit underneath the umbrella of housing standards and vacant properties. And this is a program that I had sent information about previously, but the city of, I believe it's Rochester, has a receivership program. And this is a program where landlords who have persistent problems with their properties will temporarily or permanently lose ownership of their properties. And the reason why this is preventative rather than punitive, although the way that I just described it, what is punitive. But basically what happens is, and let me pull up the window here where I have this. Okay, so basically what happens is that properties are placed into receivership when owners are unwilling or unable to make repairs or pay housing court fines on their own. And so it could be temporary if, let's say, the court takes ownership of the house, does the repairs, and then bills the landlord for it. And so the repair, it's not just, okay, you get this taken away and then, oh, well, to the people, you know, the tenants who are living there, the repairs actually do get done sometimes expeditiously as a result of this program. And then the landlord may receive ownership again of the property after the repairs have been done. And then I believe that the way that I guess it's Erie County does it, I think, is that they will build a landlord or put it into the tax roll for that property. So I'm wondering if this sounds like a program that we think is worth pursuing. And I'll just say one last thing is that I think one of the reasons why we see persistent, like, problem properties where landlords will have persistent properties is that just fining isn't necessarily enough of a deterrent, because some of these properties make so much profit. You know, they'll make tens of thousands of dollars in profit. And so the real deterrent is the threat of losing ownership, and therefore the profit off of that property, which is, I think, more of a deterrent than just a fine. So I'm wondering what y'all's thoughts are on this, if this is something worth pursuing legislatively.
Thank you, Councilwoman. If I may, just a quick follow-up with that, and then Councilwoman Resonetti, I'll come right to you. Forgive me, Councilwoman. You had said City of Rochester, and then you said Erie County. Would you happen to know from your research, is this a City of Rochester local ordinance, or is this a countywide ordinance in Erie?
That's a good question. The reason why I said Rochester first is I think I may have misspoken when I said Rochester. I said Rochester because when I was first made aware of this program, the person who told me about it said Rochester. And then in my research, so I wrote down Rochester in my notes on this ripped envelope here, keeping it classy. And but when I did some research into it, it's actually on the NewYorkCourts.gov website of Erie County. So I think that Erie County is actually where it is.
No, thank you for that. Yeah, it's interesting because I think we all know after a certain amount of time when a code issue arises, if it's not rectified within a certain amount of time, again, depending on what the New York State mandate is for that respective code issue, say high grass or a window doesn't have a covering or there are roof shingles missing, whatever it might be, legally, obviously, the city has to give them a certain amount of time. But with this particular program, this receivership that you're talking about, it sounds like when it gets to a certain point, ownership potentially is lost, even if it's a short-term interim period, which seems to be some sort of incentive for the property owner or the landlord to try to remedy it. I know after a certain amount of time here in the city, if the DPW or Parks has to carry something out, say mowing grass that's higher than 8 inches, for example, we can eventually bill them on their property taxes. But thank you for sharing that. I'll shift over to Councilwoman Resonetti, and then maybe Corp Counsel might be able to offer some insight. Councilwoman Resonetti, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilwoman Freeman, for that information. And maybe you mentioned it and I didn't catch it. Is this something, the information that you were able to look up, does this pertain only to properties that are, run down, but are like money-making sort of properties? Or does this apply in the research that you did also to other properties that are not necessarily making a lot of money, but are in distress as far as like code, right, and keeping up, but folks that have been impacted, say by COVID, landlords are just unable to make those changes. I was wondering if there was anything in there in your research that addressed that, but thank you for that information. That's really important and very helpful to look at things in a different way.
Yeah, that's a good question. So this is not the kind of program, again, from my research, where it's like someone forgets to mow the grass in 2 weeks, and then all of a sudden their house is taken away from them. On the New York court's website, it says common situations involve cases where the owners are in nursing homes, incarcerated, out of state, deceased, or simply overwhelmed by the burden of maintaining their rental properties. So I kind of interpreted that as a long-term, like this is kind of a recurring situation where a landlord has shown that for whatever reason, they're not capable of providing the necessary maintenance. And one of the benefits they list is that tenants once the house goes into, or the property goes into receivership, the tenants are able to see that the rent that they pay is going directly to improving their home. So it's not like an immediate, okay, your grass is 10 inches, so now you're losing your property. And it's also, it can be helpful for landlords too, in that it's kind of like, it's almost like a temporary property manager. So the court, I think it's the court becomes kind of the manager and the entity who coordinates the repairs and makes sure that they get done. And then after that, the property can go back into the possession of the original landlord after that.
I think so that's an important distinction right there. So it sounds like what you're saying is that so these are for properties that are experiencing reoccurring issues or really distressed properties, not a once over random code citation, again, for say high grass or something like that.
Absolutely. These are properties that have shown where it's a situation where the landlord would, and the tenants too, the property overall would really benefit from a third party who will expeditiously address these recurring or imminent safety issues that require repairs.
Got that. Thank you.
I believe that I sent, I'm going to check my email because I think that I sent out a link to this so I can reference the email so that you all can be looking at the page that I'm looking at as well. So give me 1 second to find that.
Thank you. Did anybody else want to add anything to that, or? Can Corp Counsel step in any way? Is there any information that anyone in Corp Counsel might have as it relates to the impact of New York State on say a receivership program or anything like that?
I'm looking at the Buffalo stuff right now. They say that the reason you get into it is because you failed to appear for court, failed to make a timely repair, or failed to pay outstanding fines. That's basically an ownership situation, not where it's a repeated violation, but where the owner has failed to step up and there's a risk to the public right there. I mean, it presents a couple of issues. First of all, it's done at the owner's expense, but a lot of these buildings, you can sue the owner. They're never going to show up. They're never going to pay, and you're never going to get a judgment against them. So how much is the city willing to pay fixing up private properties? The next question is personnel, because it's not the court that's the receiver. We would become the receiver. We would manage that property or have to hire the receiver to manage the property. And there was a mention that the ownership is lost. That's not the case at all. We simply step into the owner's shoes for a temporary time, and we would have control of the property and be able to expend our money fixing their property up and maybe be able to recoup at the end.
The only other things that I would add to that is, and Councilman Scrinch, you may be familiar with this because this is how we handled Ted Judson. So the Uniform City Court Act the court retains jurisdiction through compliance on the property. So not just through levying of the fine or a trial where you're found guilty, but through actual compliance. So the city already uses this too, I think, as Councilwoman Friedman was mentioning, actually get an order from the court that we're unable to perform those repairs, do those repairs, and then recover the money from the owner either through a check after the proceedings or through a lien or a subsequent proceeding. So we actually do have that on a number of properties, and we make use of that. The other distinguishing factor I would say between us and we're talking Erie, because Rochester, yeah, it's Erie.
Just Buffalo.
Buffalo, is that they actually have a housing court. Here we don't have housing court. We have city court that oversees a housing docket. New York City also has housing courts. Housing courts are unique in that they retain jurisdiction over both housing code matters and landlord tenant court. And that enables the housing court judge to have kind of a better context and really full understanding of what the scope of the property issues are. Brian and I could probably talk at length about this. We do currently have the ability to take receivership under general New York law, and actually New York law NICOM is currently pitching Albany to expand the receivership statute to include commercial properties. It's also akin to our abandonment statute. It's just that generally the burden or administrative filing requirements are quite high. But we would typically use it in the situations that Councilmember Friedman was talking about. If you have somebody in a nursing home or somebody who is deceased, so somebody who's not appearing for a reason. We just looked at actually a case today involving a deceased owner, and it became apparent that actually the bank, it's in foreclosure, and the bank is taking responsibility under New York State's new foreclosure statute from about 2 or 3 years ago, maybe 4 years ago now, and actually doing the upkeep on the property. So receivership for foreclosed homes due to bank foreclosure is really less of an issue. But I do appreciate Councilmember Friedman raising that, but I will say that we do have some active statutes that we utilize now that are very similar, but the unique benefit of a housing court is something that we do not have.
The only other thing I would also add is that receivership is a due process issue. So it's not simply like we see that there is an ongoing issue that we can take receivership. You have to go to court just like we would do in a prosecution. We have to make a motion. We have to try to serve those parties, show that they haven't appeared, that they received notice and failed to appear, and then the judge would appoint a receiver. It's not something that we can just assume without having a due process. We have to go about.
But we have to take that extra step, and we actually have to make application to the city court, which would grant us leave to make application to Supreme Court. We've been on the heels of that, on the eve of that, a number of times, having to do with out of area landlords or landlords who won't show up for court. But that very act of commencement has triggered compliance.
Thank you both for sharing that. So and please correct me if I'm wrong, but just for our own edification here. So it sounds like the receivership program that Councilwoman Friedman was referring to earlier, it sounds like as a municipality in New York State, we are, I hate to use this term, but a benefactor or a beneficiary of the potential use of this program already. What it seems like we don't have in place locally that Rochester or maybe Buffalo have is an actual or the city, a housing court that specifically deals with these particular cases to an extent, which I think is why Brian had mentioned what are the potential resources and personnel that are going to come into play with respect to carrying this out on a more consistent nature. Does that sound at least somewhat correct?
Yes, and I'm going to kick it to Brian on this a little bit. I think it's somewhat correct. However, for example, Rochester's very robust program began, I want to say, in the 1980s, late 80s, early 90s, in response to their lead abatement program, which granted the city kind of large scale rights. But I'll turn it over to Brian. I just want to mention that there are some distinguishing characteristics between Rochester and the city of Binghamton.
No, I was more referring to the personnel who's going to make these repairs.
Right. Okay. Got it.
Usually when we do these repairs, that's someone from Parks or that's someone from DPW doing that cleanup. which is why we don't generally get into doing repairs. We have used it for knocking down a building. We had 26 Seminary. That was an eyesore for a long, long time, a problem. We used the equitable jurisdiction of the court. We didn't really take receivership, but we went in and tore that building down at their expense. Got a judgment, which we may never collect on, for several $20,000, $38,000.
But Syracuse has a great program that has to do with properties in tax foreclosure, which does permit, it's a repair and deduct program, which does admit after application for the city to go in and make repairs to houses that are habitated by tenants. But it does go through an annual bid process every year for the contractors assigned to do that work. That would be like fixing an area of a roof. Generally, the repairs are not more than $5,000 or something the last time I looked at it. But that's also a very similar program to what Councilmember Friedman was talking about.
It's a repair, it's a time and materials contract they bid on.
Right.
They give a given rate and a given time for their work, and then they
But here in Broome County, would it be, Brian and Sharon, would it be correct in assuming, and please tell me if I'm wrong, is the dynamic in our county's environment different in that particular situation, right? Because Sharon, if you're saying once the property goes into tax foreclosure, number one, we aren't the body that can foreclose due to lack of taxes. Number one, that's county, and even when the county does go into tax foreclosure, can we even act without the deed of the property in hand, even if it is in tax foreclosure?
So that's a great question. So the tax foreclosure program I was talking about is by nature, because the enabling statute for the Greater Syracuse Land Bank enables the land bank, which is in our county, is county specific, and Syracuse City Land Bank is able to take the property prior to actually a tax foreclosure action, just when the property is delinquent for a certain amount of quarters. And essentially it works as a receivership program that the land bank has by nature of its rights as a land bank under statute.
Got it. Thank you for the clarification.
Yeah. However, we could work in partnership, and we've kicked this around a couple times. We could work in partnership with the Broome County Land Bank to essentially do a shared services agreement or something of that nature. But that is how you would have to structure it. Got it.
Good to know. Forgive me, are any colleagues wanted to add anything, ask any questions regarding this? No. Awesome. Thank you both very much. Anything else anyone wanted to add in broadly regarding receivership or anything in this area? We also have issues of how can we more effectively deal with vacant properties owned by banks, imminent life safety code issues, how can code enforcement be preventative, not just punitive? How can we better deal with a property's internal code related issues, safety versus aesthetic? Anyone want to touch on anything regarding any of those subpoints?
I do want to go back and highlight, just for our note-taking purposes, that we've received a lot of comments about restructuring the code department in terms of its customer relations process. So a lot of people saw the housing coordinator topic and liked it, but then they're thinking, okay, housing coordinator, but then how else can we better receive the questions and concerns of the general public? Because as we've all recognized, every complaint goes to code, but is that the job of the receptionist to then triage what is reported? So we did receive a lot of, collectively as council received a lot of feedback about possibly establishing a hotline where the code questions and or comments or concerns can be recorded and then documented. And if we need to have them shared publicly. There was also a lot of comments, again, in support of a housing coordinator, but that coordinator would also field aesthetic type concerns that are not necessarily code, but just because there is no section or no person to receive these questions or concerns about issues that are not really violations, they would receive those as well. So I just wanted to add those, the information I received to the discussion tonight.
Duly noted.
So question, just to clarify, Councilwoman
Please.
Riley, are you talking like having available like a Q&A type of a thing, like on our website where people can go? What exactly?
This was
How
received
do you
from
envision that?
constituents. This is from the constituents, so I did not really vet it.
Okay.
I'm
Okay.
sharing it for our discussion so that we can have a fruitful discussion based upon what was received. So no, I don't have a planned structure, but
So it could be
but I
something
did
as simple as
receive-
that, maybe.
It could
Simple,
be.
yeah,
It could
okay.
be, like I said, a voicemail system
Mhm.
that is then transcribed, that's available publicly. So people say, okay, there was well, I don't know if I want somebody to say they had a concern about X on Chestnut, and it could be mine, right? But we would know that that has already been addressed, opposed to, again, this is something that was shared. Instead of one person being responsible for triaging these things that may not be deemed high priority to those in the code office, but are very much problematic to everyone on the block, right? But then they would see this and be aware that it has been reported and someone is working on it.
Duly noted. Did anybody want to add anything to that? Okay. Anything else with respect to, again, the housing coordinator was also mentioned. Anything with respect to the role that the housing coordinator will play? I don't know if Corp Council can, at least with first round level discussions, kind of discuss primary roles and functions of what we're looking at, and maybe that can start the conversation off.
I just, I presume that a new housing coordinator position would be in addition to the housing safety specialist, Danielle Garrick, we have currently, who fields complaints, assists tenants with relocation, and is also a certified code inspector. This is in addition to her.
Yeah, so I think off the cuff, so I know we all know that early on, Mayor Cram had released an idea for a housing coordinator within Corp Council to deal specifically with the caseload of the number of code related, which I think is a great idea, and I know that there seemed to be, I don't want to speak for anybody, but there seemed to be broad support for it. But you know, do we have, are the roles and responsibilities of that position isolated? Is that role sufficient? Do we maybe need to talk about a you know, obviously congruent with ongoing discussions with the mayor, is that something that we need to maybe look at potentially expanding? Is one person not enough? You know, things like that. So I didn't know if there was anything that Corp Council might be able to offer with respect to that particular position.
Sure. So we have that position posted, Assistant Corporation Counsel Code Prosecutor Specialist, essentially requiring 3 years of court experience with a preference for people who have some criminal or quasi-criminal law experience to address the issues related to our code. We actually have an applicant coming in for a second round here at the city and doing a full City Hall experience with us tomorrow.
Nice.
Absent her application, we had not received any other applicants who were a good fit for this particular role. However, I think all those questions that you raised are good ones. And I guess the verdict is still out because we haven't had somebody in that role yet. I will say that from Brian's perspective, based off of the mandatory disclosure lift, she or he may require support staff.
Awesome. And again, is it correct, Brian and Sharon, that the primary role of whomever the person might be is to deal again with the caseload of, forgive me, the caseload of cases that specifically deal with City of Binghamton Court code related issues? Is that correct?
The job description is that they deal with enforcing all segments of not just the property maintenance code, but anything that's in the code of ordinances. So
Got it.
And that includes nuisance properties, but the primary focus is housing.
And
Right.
also does related civil actions as required. And those are those actions for injunctive relief, declaratory relief that would allow the city to, for example, file an abandonment proceeding. So that would be in their bailiwick as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. Did anybody want to add anything to that? Anything at all? Okay. Anything, again, one last go around with respect to imminent life safety code issues? How can code enforcement be preventative, not just punitive? How can we better deal with the properties, or how can we better deal with the property's internal code related issues, safety versus aesthetics? Anyone want to add anything else in relation to that? Councilwoman Rosanetti, please.
This is one thing which we hear. Number two, when we're talking about vacant properties owned by banks, what I often hear from constituents is just this, level of frustration because of how long it takes to get through anything that involves the banks, or not even being able to get information that's needed. So I don't know if Corporate Counsel has any information to share regarding that could shed a little light as to how that really works, and why are often constituents frustrated when they're looking up properties that are owned by the bank.
That's a really good question, Councilwoman.
My perception of that is that often they don't understand how a foreclosure action takes and what the process is for a foreclosure in New York. They will see a notice posted on the door from a bank, or they'll see a bank person over there taking steps or making property maintenance. They don't understand that New York State has created some incredible hurdles to get through to finalize a foreclosure. Once you get through those hurdles, you then take title by having an auction. Banks used to hold on to them for a long time and not actually file them. And I think it's kind of an education issue, but it's also, you have to know what you're looking for to find those records in the county clerk's office. They're not easy to find. You need to know the name of the prior owner. You need to know the name of the bank that held the mortgage, which may not be the bank that they actually have the first mortgage with, because there might be an assignment of mortgage. So that may be the bank that actually filed the mortgage foreclosure, not the original lender.
Quick tip to anybody out there, if you wanted to pass it along to your constituents, if they do know the name of the property owner, if you know the address of the property, you can find on Broome GIS. You can plug that into Broome IQS, which is the county clerk's website, and you should be able to pull up whether or not there's an existing foreclosure action, and actually view what the status of that case is by looking at the documents associated. So you can see when the bank filed the summons and complaint, where the lis pendens is, and kind of whether or not there's been a certificate filed. Also bear in mind that there is a right of redemption period for an owner of property during the bank foreclosure period and for the period prior to the auction date. Generally, bank foreclosures, if they're dealing with somebody who's difficult to get a hold of, they have to provide notice to anybody with an interest in the property. That usually takes quite a bit of time, particularly if you have a deceased owner, because they have to provide notice to the next of kin, and also any creditors that may also have judgments or liens associated with the property. So that's usually what the time is on the front end, is essentially deciding who all of the defendants are and who they have to notice. And a property foreclosure generally takes anywhere from 1 to 3 years.
The,
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I also presume.
Go ahead,
that-
Brian.
I also presume that everyone's familiar with the IQS system. Do you all know what IQS is? Are you aware of what that is? If Broome County Clerk's Office has the records online, and they use an outside agency to run that for them called IQS. So if you do Broome County Clerk's Office IQS, then you can do, the one tip I would give you is they have a general search feature. Use the name search, which is right below that. If you put the name in, last name, first name, hit a name search, it becomes a whole lot easier to go through your results.
That's a great point. Thank you for that, Brian. And Brian and Sharon, I don't know if this is correct. Obviously, you guys are more professionals than at least I'll ever claim to be in this area. But at least what I've heard anecdotally is the extent to which banks are willing to hold on to these property deeds once a property foreclosure has occurred, right? The bank is highly incentivized to hold on to that deed for as long as it possibly can, to some extent, because that's on their P&L, and that property has a value. But it also, I would imagine, if it supersedes a certain amount of time, they probably could potentially want to shoot off to get rid of it, because then it becomes just more of a pain than what it might be worth.
Banks normally will go to the auction and bid what they're owed, plus their attorney's fees for and any costs associated with the bankruptcy, with the foreclosure. So often they will win the bid because they'll have, I don't know, it's a $70,000 house, and they'll have a mortgage for 60 and attorney's fees for 20. So it's $80,000 that they're bidding for a $70,000 house. They realize going in, they're never going to get that. We have seen some change in that in the last 5 years or so, I'd say, where they are much more likely to say, let's unload this thing quick and take the loss and limit our loss. Because if they keep it, they'll pay $500 a year to us for vacant properties fee. They're going to be on the hook for doing maintenance. They're going to have to mow the lawn. They're going to have to shovel the sidewalks. If there's other issues, we will cite them. And John Westgate has been pretty good at knowing who they contact for what buildings, for what banks, and they will do it. 10 Jarvis Street. We just called them and said, listen, you got to get the grass cut. You're in for a close. They're not even having taken possession yet. They're just in the process. Like, you got to get the grass cut. Okay, we'll get over there and get it done. So they're going to be doing some of those things on that property. So what New York State has done has changed that dynamic a little bit.
That's good.
It's not perfect, but it's better than it used to be.
That's good to hear. And for just to get it for everyone on the record who might be watching, Jonathan Westgate, he used to actually be a code enforcement officer here in the city of Binghamton. He's now the city's vacant property officer. Anybody have anything they wanted to add to that? Anything at all? Going once, twice? All right. Oh, Councilwoman Friedman, my apologies, please.
Thank you. Oh, no problem. I have one other suggestion, not related to
Please.
So this is maybe a minor thing, but so New York City has a website it's on the Public Advocate's website dedicated to a landlord watch list. And so what they have is and I thought that I had sent this out to everybody, and it turns out that I did not. But it's a website where they have each major landlord who has multiple properties, and then they have the building, like the number of buildings on the watch list, number of units that this person owns, and then they list the number of open health code violations, or the number of evictions, number of tax liens, like all of this kind of information that would be useful to a tenant who would be looking to rent from someone. And again, this is not to punish small landlords, but more the slumlords that we're talking about that have multiple properties with multiple code violations, and they just let their properties kind of fall into foreclosure and don't really care, and they go to auction, whatever. And I think it would also, if we had something like this, it would create an air of transparency where even if someone doesn't necessarily make use of this list while trying to find a house or trying to find a place to live, at least if we have this information on the City of Binghamton website, I think that can also help foster trust between the public and the code department, because they feel like the code department is trying to make information public. And they also, on this list, they differentiate between hazardous violations and immediately hazardous violations. So, minor violations and then really egregious ones like immediately hazardous violations includes heat, no hot water, rodents, lead paint, etc. And then other violations might include issues with lighting, painting, required signage, proper fire safety, etc. And then you can also search by building and search by landlord as well. So they only have a worst landlords watch list, but I think it might be beneficial if we were to pursue something like this to also have a best landlords watch list, an aspirational web page where that could be maybe like a badge of honor kind of thing, like, where if a landlord or a rental company or something like that can say, we made it on Binghamton's best landlord watch, top 10 list for 2 years in a row or something like that. So I'll send a link out. Again, I apologize because I thought I had sent this out and I hadn't. So I'm going to send this out right now.
Councilwoman, you said that that's a list that's available for public consumption?
Yes. Yeah. It's
Okay.
on Jamani Williams, the public advocate of New York City. It's a .com web address, but when you click on it, it has the seal of the New York City public advocate in the corner. So I don't know why it's not a .gov website, but it does appear to be an official website.
Got it. Thank you. Excellent. Anyone want to add anything else? Okay. Just to keep the flow moving, the broader second area was slumlords and tenant responsibilities. And the one bullet that we had under this was, how can we more proactively deal with repeat code offenders? Anybody want to offer anything on that? I can definitely. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry.
Please go ahead, Councilman Burns. Please.
Yeah. Do we already fine them more for second offenses or third offenses? And a lot of the landlords are LLCs. So is it the LLC that's got that's got the offense and not the landlord who might have the offense? And is it the offense just on the one property, or is it if they own several properties? So this had an offense over here and now the same offense over there. Is it the person or the property, or, and I don't know, I'm asking the question. I didn't do any research on that. So.
No, that's a fair question. If I were a betting man, Councilman, I'd probably say it would be the LLC, whoever the entity is, but that's a good question. I don't know if that's something anyone in court counsel might be able to more intelligently speak to, but it's a really good question.
Go ahead, Brian.
Currently under our fine structure, under the 1-4, and then under the code provision, that's 265, We have a kicker clause that if you are convicted of more than 3 code violations in the first year, the minimum fine automatically goes to $1,000 per violation.
Not property specific.
And it's not property specific. The questions of LLCs it can be difficult. If we only get the LLC, we can only get a fine, but we cannot get what's called a conditional discharge, meaning you have to void all violations of the law for the next year. And if you fail to avoid all violations of the law for the next year, I could petition the court the next time you get a ticket within that year, and I can ask that you be resentenced to the maximum up to on the first case, which in most cases would be up to 15 days in the Broome County Jail and or $500. So if I max out the fine on the first go round, like you plead guilty, pay $500 at the first get go, the only real option when I violate a CD is to go to 15 days in jail because they've already maxed out the fine. However, we have used that provision where they've gotten more than 3 convictions in 5 years and asked for the $1,000 fine.
And some of those places have been LLCs. So make the distinction between an LLC in which we do not know who the principal or agent is by nature of a filed DBA or other type of document. If we do know who the principal or agent is, we file it against the principal agent.
We file against the individual as the principal or the agent of the LLC, and we bring the charge with their name, which gives us 2 things. We get to have that.
As principal agent.
We either, if we resolve it with an ACD, meaning they resolved it and they did some kind of, then they have a 6-month ACD, they have to stay clean for 6 months, or we would refile, or they get a 1-year CD if they plead guilty, pay a fine, and then we can do the CD against that individual. The other advantage is that we then have the ability, if we can name the individual, we can also ask for a arrest warrant or a bench warrant. I can't get a bench warrant or arrest warrant on an LLC because there's no physical body to go seize.
Yeah. Brian and Sharon, if I can ask really quick, just for clarification in my notes. So Brian, you had mentioned that the fees are repeated, are increased to $1,000, and that's more than 3 fines in 5 years. Is that what that is?
3 convictions. 3
convictions. More than convictions in 5 years.
Yes, and
Got it.
that usually applies to individuals. It can apply to the LLC, but
Yeah.
It doesn't. I tell people, listen, yep, this is. I call it the "don't poke me in the eye" principle. Like, I have discretion. The classic example is a code violation. They have a junk vehicle on the property. They remove it. We settle the case, and I said, "Don't bring the car back." I've had that happen a number of times where like, "Oh, no one's looking. Bring the car back."
Right.
Then I file the violation. It's a discretionary thing with me whether you file the violation of the CD or the ACD, and it's like, don't. You get notices of violation except for garbage. Don't poke me in the eye and come back here with the exact same violation, or I'll file the paperwork.
Right.
You do them.
Councilman Burns?
Is there any legislation that we could do that could make it easier for us to deal with the landlords or the LLCs
We
or
could change that structure.
et cetera?
We should change the penalty structure under what we're going for.
We could review the 1-4. Right now it's a violation, which is equivalent to a parking ticket. I know that sounds bad, but the reason why it's actually good for us is because if you kick it up to a misdemeanor, which will give you a year in jail or higher fine amounts, you would then be looking at a jury trial for every single prosecution, and you would grind the whole system to a halt. So that would not be good for prosecution. I would rather pile up smaller fines in more quicker succession than have misdemeanor jury trials.
We could also,
But I think 500, 1,500 may be the max that you can do as a violation. Otherwise, it automatically transfers up to being a misdemeanor. We can research that and see whether there's room to change that. And it may also be the type of thing that you want to lower it to, instead of having it, well, 3 and 5 is actually, I was thinking, do you want to shorten the time period? But the only way you wouldn't want to shorten the time period, you'd want to reduce the number. And going to 2 code violations could be you can get to 2 violations pretty quick if you have a number of buildings.
And anything specifically on enhancing enforcement efforts against LLCs?
Yeah, and I wasn't looking for more punishment or anything like that. I was looking for ways of making it easier for.
Yeah, the thing that would make it the easiest for code right now, given the number of LLCs we have, is if we had a way of identifying who the principals behind those LLCs are. I guess what I would encourage all of you is, I'm not certain that we can do anything on this local level, other than encourage our elected officials in New York State, in the legislature and in the legislature, to adopt laws that require them to reveal who they are. I would refer you to the Florida Secretary of State. If you go to their website, Florida requires LLCs to re-register with the state every 2 years. They collect a fee of about $25 per LLC, and they make them file a document that becomes public and gets posted on the Secretary of State's website, declaring who their board of directors or who their members are for that year or for that reporting cycle.
So there's
so
no
it-
way.
It
There's
does
no way.
couple
of us-
ways.
There's
It
no
makes
way
it
of us-
easier for us to enforce, and it gives them New York State a good source of revenue. But anyways,
So there's no way for us to adopt a law, local law, saying that if you are going to buy a property as an LLC, you have to tell us who's going to be in charge of the property.
So Brian's making the face because we may have an issue of state preemption. What we can do is we can look at that issue similarly to the high grass requirement. It happens to be a code that's more restrictive than it is at the state, but Corporation Council can do some research on that and
we
get
can
back to you.
take a look at it. It'd be really nice. I'd love to be.
We would love that.
I would love to be able to tell you, yes, we can. I have a feeling,
I'd call you Barack Obama if you should say that. No, I'm just kidding.
here's what happens is they come back, the state comes back and says, listen, we're trying to encourage people to invest in these properties. And one of the ways we encourage them is to give them the protection of the LLC. I
Right.
think you hurt the public by doing that, but that's what they make decisions for up in all.
Yeah.
So, but I would ask you to advocate with the people that you know there to try to do something like that. I've told NICOM, they actually said, oh, that's not a bad idea. I don't think it went anywhere, but I've been pushing it for the last couple of years. The other thing you might want to add, totally a little bit off topic, but not totally, property fire damage insurance.
Mm,
If you're gonna own a rental property, you gotta have proof of insurance for fire, just for demo. It doesn't have to be to restore the building, just to take it down. It's amazing how many the really rundown buildings, no one has put any money in fire insurance, and so when they burn, there's a 6 or 8 month process that we have to go through to get,
We could require
to
that
go through to get it
locally.
down. That may be
Right.
something we could require locally, but that's.
Right, yeah, Brian and Sherrod, I was just about to ask in the same vein that Councilman Burns asked the good question that he did a little earlier. Is that a local law is that an RL that we could sponsor here in the city? Obviously we need to,
We will have to do research, but that might have more potential.
yeah, because I think we have a number of properties that we're dealing with that. I think in almost every council district in the entire city. And there's an inordinate a number of them right now that I know your guys' office is
Yep.
very directly
Or-
dealing with.
Whether we could require it first instance, or could we give them some kind of, if you show proof of this, you will get this benefit or that, something that we would
Right.
encourage them to get it. I don't know how to.
Yeah,
Maybe as vacant property, maybe as part of the vacant property registration, we would add it to requirement. If you have a vacant property, you must show proof of registration.
Well, what Brian kind of didn't state is if you have an owner occupied property, it's a primary residential home, you're gonna generally have homeowner's insurance related to that home. That's the
Yeah.
difference between an owner occupied property and a rental property. So in
right.
rental properties, there isn't that kind of insurance requirement.
Ken's frustration, my frustration is New York State says if you're gonna own a car, if you have it on the road, you must have car insurance. It
Right.
seems
Yeah.
like doing that for a building would not be unreasonable. And the
Yeah.
cost would have to be minimal because if every building had insurance.
But if council's interested in both of those issues and exploring them, we're happy to do the research on that front.
Yeah, if you could, I don't want to, I think I can speak safely for all my colleagues on this one. Yeah, anything that court counsel could do to maybe and then maybe we can coordinate this with President Strawn, but maybe at the, obviously not inherently the next work session, but at some work session, maybe this is a discussion that we can have regarding what are the potential local options that we have with respect to exercising some of this stuff.
And one more thing.
Please.
I don't know if it's still the policy actually, but we had a policy started under a couple administrations ago where people were behind on their water bills. They would print their names in the paper, which I did not like the policy because I knew some people maybe just run into a bad run, and suddenly all their neighbors realized that they've lost their job or something. So I didn't like that policy. But when it comes to bad landlords, as they get all these, especially repeat offenders, maybe we wouldn't put the first offense in, but maybe we could start publicizing who these bad players are.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I think you could probably publicize convictions. I don't know if we could publicize citations. But if you get convicted, that's a different story. That's a public record. Public convictions are a public record. They're available in city court. If you went and asked, has this person or this entity been convicted, you will be able to find that information.
Mhm.
Yeah,
And maybe
that's
we-
easy because that's a matter of public record already.
And then there was also maybe somebody in the city, maybe somebody in the code department or somebody could take charge of it. But there was a Facebook page, Scenes of Shame or something. I forget exactly what it was, but it was pictures of garbage around. Well, maybe we could do a Landlords of Shame, and advertise. They wouldn't like that, right? They might start wanting to get their face off and then take their face off if they started being nice. Anyway,
That's a public consumption list right there. Definitely.
I think that sounds like a wonderful thing for a non-for-profit or other entity to start on our behalf.
right.
I'm not sure if the city wants to step in front of that.
Yeah, I got you. Yeah, all right.
Although, if you want to take a quick look at the ongoing board of shame, it is in the code enforcement office on a bulletin board.
It's mostly, I'll tell you what it mostly is. It's photographs of such conditions that they find in different buildings that they're head scratchers. They found a sink that had an electrical outlet mounted inside the sink. Or just other things that are like, who does?
Wow.
This?
Wow.
But what we will do is we'll add it to the research list, what information can we share about repeat offenders? I think if what I'm hearing from city council is your concern is less about the owner occupied residential property, who isn't able to paint the front of their house due to some income reason, and more about kind of major cases of blight or habitability.
Definitely.
Okay.
Thank you. Anyone else?
If I can just add to what
Please.
what Sharon just said, yeah, in my mind, when I think of a slumlord, I don't know if there's an actual definition of a slumlord, but I'm imagining people who use loopholes in the system to make a profit at the expense of legitimately providing quality housing. Someone who buys a property knowing full well that they're not going to take care of it, but they could just let it go into foreclosure and then go get picked up at the auction, and it wouldn't affect them either way. People who are making a profit off of the housing industry with a total disregard for actually providing quality housing. Not people who are, nice, owner occupied, they live in the unit above, or, whatever the case may be. Not trying to punish those kinds of people.
That comports with this administration's, and I think our personal views of what that means. We'll have our research focused on that.
Thank you, Councilman Burns.
Yeah. in regards to publicizing people's names, I mean, the police department, if they arrest somebody, that person's name gets on their Facebook page and it gets in the newspaper long before any trial. So there's that.
Thank you.
And
Anyone else?
and that Facebook page is run by the Binghamton Police Department. Okay, thanks.
It is, yeah.
We're aware of that practice. We're not necessarily fans of that practice, but we're aware of that practice. As lawyers, we're always guilty, innocent until not proven guilty, but nonetheless, Councilman Burns, will take a look at what the bounds of what we're permitted to kind of post are. Clearly, there is a large history, particularly in the state of posting people's arrests or citations.
And they actually have had to pull that back somewhat because the state adopted laws that, for instance, they used to make available people's booking photographs. They're now prohibited from doing that. There are other things along those lines that
Have been curtailed.
yeah, I just know that if I'm in a court of law and I want to ask someone about something on the court, I cannot really ask them, have you been arrested before? I can ask them, have you been convicted before? And that's a fair question. That's why I make the distinction between citation or arrest and a conviction.
But there may be the ability to do that so long as you give somebody the ability to appeal or remove their name. So we'll do some research on it and we'll take a look at the New York City kind of names of shame page and get back to you with all due speed.
Awesome. Thank you. Anyone else?
Chair Scaringi, can we have a time check? Are we?
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, it's 20 after 6.
And so what time are we?
We had slated an hour and a half. So we're getting kind of close. Yeah.
Thank you.
Of course. Did anyone else have anything that they wanted to add in any of those broader 2 topic areas that we've discussed today?
I did kind of want to highlight.
Please.
So I've had, again, people writing, and I myself tried to find it in the code. And so I'm leaning on the Corp Council team because they typically know where it is. Is there an ordinance that requires people who rent or own multiple dwelling units to have a different type of garbage and recycling services? So they would need a bulk trash bin. Is there something where that is stated clearly? And are they held accountable for reporting that they've then contracted this bulk trash service?
Councilwoman, when you say bulk, you mean, did you say again, people that own multiple properties? Is that what you mean?
No,
okay.
The multi-dwelling units. So
multi-dwelling unit, got it. Okay, got it. Yep, sorry. My fault. Thank you. Please continue. I'm sorry. I just for the notes. I'm sorry. Yep, okay. Got it.
I think they're deliberating.
I'm looking right now.
Yeah, I was just saying to Brian's looking at our code right now. I have not seen that issue come up in my 6 years here. That doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. So Brian is taking a look.
Here's what it says. What I'm finding, it's 265-15. It says A, every rental unit shall have adequate rubbish or garbage storage facilities. I'm not certain if that's defined. Of a kind sufficient to meet the requirements of the Department of Public Works and the County Health Department for garbage and rubbish collection disposal. B, disposal facilities, container size. Every dwelling unit shall have an adequate garbage disposal facility, garbage storage container. For the purpose of the chapter, the minimum of 1 20-gallon container or its equivalent per dwelling unit shall be deemed to be adequate garbage disposal facilities. Every occupant of a rental unit shall dispose of his or her garbage and other organic waste. The disposal facility or garbage container shall be the owner's responsibility to supply facilities or containers for all rental units. It shall be prohibited to store. I know that we had 2 or 3 prosecutions in the last couple of months where they were not providing either not providing the containers or they were not properly storing them. They were putting them out to the wrong side or leaving them on the side of the street, not behind the building, because we do have. It shall be prohibited to store, accumulate garbage, debris, and refuse in the public hallway. There's another section here You can't have those containers, you have to have those containers behind the building, they can't be out. The case in question was on Murray Street, I believe, and it was always at the curb. The issue was that the landlord I was prosecuting was like, I move into the back of the building, the tenants come out and move it because they complained that the smell underneath their window. So every time I move it away from the curb, they pull it back out.
But
We gotta resolve
But
it.
I think Councilwoman Riley's question is there a size of container that is required for when you have a unit over an apartment with over a certain amount of units? And I think our code just says adequate container size. So what we could do is we can take a look at that section of the code, see if there's any other similar provisions in the code. Like, for example, I know that we do require enclosure in certain cases, and then see if that can be improved to bring clarity to our residents and owners.
I do know that when you get to the planning or the zoning, the site plans and zoning code, if you're building a new building, they're going to look there. You do have standards for what your enclosure must look like for those buildings. One of the issues that we have is because our zoning code is being applied to already existing neighborhoods. There are a lot of neighborhoods, for instance, the Tree Street neighborhood, those areas. You could require dumpster, but there's no place to get a truck back to a dumpsters, and there's often not a place in the back of those buildings where if you wanted to site a dumpster, put a fence around it, you could put it there anyways if you had one.
Brian
Some
and
people, though,
Sharon,
I know, like, for instance, listening to the planning picture last night, there's a big company called Amicus now that's taking over a lot of students. They don't like our garbage system, so they've paid for somebody to come in and take all their garbage away. They did a contract, they do it twice a week for all their buildings. And so that helps them with garbage issues, keeping their property.
Brian and Sharon, just as a follow-up to that, and then I'll tip over to Councilman Burns. So in subsection 265-15 that you just read, Brian, did I understand correctly that you used the word container when referring to that?
Yes,
So does that technically mean that properties of this type, when their garbage is out and they're only in garbage bags, are they not breaking the law then? Because it's actually not in a container. Because that's actually what I see a lot of.
no, I don't believe that's correct. What this is talking about is tenants will often put garbage out on the back porch because it's midweek and it's not garbage day. They need to
Right.
get a container to store their garbage. If they take it out to the curb, they can put it out in green bags or blue bags, just like everybody else. But
Wow. So I'm just gonna, and Councilman Burns, forgive me, I apologize. I'll shoot right next to you after this. I'm just gonna ask this. Do we have the agency as a municipality to, I'm just gonna be blunt and say it. With respect to, and I'm gonna make sure I'm differentiating here, Brian, like you did, with garbage pickup, can we actually mandate garbage bins, containers, something that is not a blue bag, something that is hard plastic or metal and has to have a lid on top of it, i.e., hint, hint, particularly during the summer months when squirrels, raccoons, skunks, and everything else have a feast day. Can we do that?
I believe you can. Am I unmuted right now?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can hear you, Brian. I'm sorry.
The message was up there, but I wasn't sure it was taking effect yet.
No, you're okay.
You probably can. You would want to talk to the DPW about what that would do to your garbage collection.
Yeah.
Because right now they can just walk up, grab those bags and throw them in. If every time they go and pick them up, dump them in and bring them back. I know that every summer my office gets a whole raft of complaints. You destroyed my garbage can. I want to get compensated for it. You destroyed my garbage can. So there are practical issues about why we do allow them to put it in bags because it's more efficient for pickup, which keeps
Right.
your labor cost and your overtime and your other things going down. But it may be something that just for purpose of cleanliness you want to consider. But there's
Yeah.
other ramifications. That's all I'm saying. I'm pointing out.
And if city council is interested, we can kind of add that at the list of things to look at. Just bear in mind containers have a cost associated with them.
The other thing is that I don't think you have the ability to say it only applies to rentals. It has
Yeah,
to be
with
a little bit-
that,
It would have
that
to
would
apply
be-
to everybody.
that's a citywide thing. No, absolutely. No, I appreciate that. And Sharon, if you could add that onto the list, I appreciate that. Councilman Burns, please.
Well, before we move to Councilman Burns, I wanted to kind of go back and clarify the impetus for that question was because we have the multi-dwelling units with like 20 or so with these bags at the curb on their trash pickup day. And to me, that's different from a single unit, which would have 1 or 2 bags, but now you have 19 bags or 19 unofficial bags, or however they choose to throw it out there, which to me, some municipalities, and I can send exemplars, when you have more than 5 units in a building, you are held to a different standard.
Can I say something real quick? I was told by zoning last year, sorry, I've been listening to all. I was told by zoning last year that the scenario Councilwoman Riley just said is absolutely not allowed for blue bags, that you have to have a dumpster or something enclosed. Because I have a couple places on Tremont and on Evans Street or Second Street on Tremont, that this is a major issue. And they said absolutely cannot have blue bags on it, but I can't remember exactly how many. But Councilwoman Riley's example, according to zoning, would absolutely not allow just random blue bags out there from people. But that's what they told me. So I'm just throwing that out there.
Councilman Strong, those are probably what they were answering you is if you were designing a building right now and you had a certain number of units, we would be asking you or requiring you to have the garbage facilities so the truck can get back and then you're going to do that. I think what's being described are buildings that have been around for 50, 60 years and predate our requirements to have those facilities. And those they put them out in blue bags.
But we'll check our zoning code and see if there's any way to make that clear and tie maybe chapter 265 and 410 together on this issue.
Definitely. Thank you. Councilman Burns, please.
Yeah, thank you. You all hit everything that I was going to talk about, but about the garbage cans and the requirements for the garbage cans. My daughter lives over in Vestal, and the streets, they all have garbage cans, and it's all private. It's not city, but they don't have a problem with the garbage spewing out onto the street. It's just the streets all look beautiful, and ours don't. And one of the reasons is blue bags. So we'd have to, I know that we make money on the blue bags, so nobody ever really wants to deal with the fact that, we're getting the income for the, taking the, whatever that term is for the landfill. But up where I am, yeah. So up where I am, I have a garbage can, and I just take my blue bags, and it fits 2 big blue bags in my big garbage bin. And the guys come in and they just pick them up right out of there and put them in. It doesn't take any moment. They don't have to pick up the whole thing and dump it. They just take the blue bags, and everybody on my street does exactly the same thing because we have so many raccoons up here. So I would like to see that these, I don't know if we ever had to get rid of the blue bags. I know in our budget, we'd have to figure out, something else. But I think it'd be better for the city if we did away with the whole blue bag situation and had required lids on the garbage cans and et cetera, et cetera. All right, that's my 2 cents. Thanks.
I do know of communities where they require you to have the containers, but they also usually require you to have a specific type of container. And they have a garbage truck that is very specific, has forks on the side that pull up and dump it and to go.
Yeah, I get that. That's what they do in Vestal, but I'm just
that might be the type of thing that that would take some long-term planning and how to.
Yeah, I'm not talking about getting the new trucks and all that. I'm just talking about requiring people to have a bin and not just throwing all as the councilwoman said, putting all those blue bags. And I've seen that place on Tremont. I go past it all the time, Phil, and I know exactly the building you're talking about. And it's a problem. And when the wind blows, forget about it.
Yeah, I would support that 100%. We've also got that issue with recycling stuff too. I went down to Kovarks a few years ago, and I bought a I'm going to plug down on Clinton Street in First Ward. I bought a recycling bin that actually had a lid on it, because even that stuff can fly out of there, you know, particularly on a spring or a fall day when the wind starts to pick up. So yeah, I think that's a great idea. Thank you for that. Anything else anyone wanted to add? Councilwoman Riley.
So that
Please.
ties into also tenant responsibilities, which I think, and I'm really, I had to sit down with Amicus, and they're really trying to hold their student renters accountable. Now, again, this is what they're telling me, but that talks about responsibility as a member of the community, as a renter. And that's important, right? We want them, even though we know they're only here for a 10-month period or however long they rent, or whomever comes in our community, to kind of know the expectations. So the question when we talk about tenant responsibilities, is it the responsibility of the tenant to learn our expectations, or is it the responsibility of the landlord to teach them what is expected? And then we ultimately hold the landlord responsible, regardless of the number of units in the property. So if you're in a single family home and that your neighbor doesn't know about blue bags, you know, as counsel, as neighbors, what do? We don't have the welcome wagon anymore. And so that has caused a lot of issues regarding transition. So we do have this title here, tenant responsibilities, but as council, do we come to the tenant, or do we hold the landlord more responsible? Do we hold them accountable to making their tenants responsible?
Councilwoman Rossetti, please.
Well, I think that Councilman Riley made a very, very good point. You know, what do we do? Do we do anything if the landlord is taking all the appropriate steps, whatever they might look like, to educate the tenants, right? And then what do we do? What do they do if their tenants are not responsive to that? How does it impact them? And it's that, you know, where we go, right? And because certainly, and we do talk a whole lot about landlord responsibility, as we should, but certainly we know that there is a lot of tenants who are absolutely not going to follow the rules or even, you know, consider what is acceptable in our community. It might not happen often, but it happens enough. So what do we do then? You know, and I certainly don't have the answers to that, but I have heard from landlords in the past about their own, excuse me, frustration regarding their tenants and what do they do and what are their rights and so forth. So yeah, but I think that's a great point, you know, as we're talking about both landlord and tenant responsibilities.
You know, I would agree. The tenant responsibilities, this is something that you know, I know members of this body know that we've been talking about for quite a bit of time now. And I think there's kind of two broad categories here. Number one, I think how both Councilwomen Riley and Rossetti were referring to, right? Just the broader education, if you will, of, you know, blue bags versus what day of the week your garbage is picked up and things like that. What day of the week is yard waste? I guess I'm a little more old school when it comes to this type of stuff. If I buy a home in the city of Binghamton and I don't pay my taxes by the deadline, if the taxing body looks at me and says, you're in legal trouble because you didn't pay your taxes, there is no court that is going to let me slide with the defense. The taxing body didn't proactively educate me on when the date of taxes is due. It's freely available. It's on their website. You have a phone number that you can call, right? So at the end of the day, I think there's a bigger issue here with respect to owners and landlords and property managers and tenants of what is the proper balance that is struck between individual responsibility as it relates to, anyone in that particular situation. So, but I agree wholeheartedly with you. I know that at the last meeting that we had when we talked about quality of life issues, this was a pretty in-depth part of the discussion with respect to citations and convictions and how these things are cited. And it seemed from what Corp Counsel communicated, which I know a number of us have had a lot of experience with in our respective council districts, is largely, unless it's an issue of ownership, I believe is the word Sharon had used last time, it largely is going to come down, responsibility legally is going to come down to the property owner, not the tenant, even if the wrongdoing is on the part of the tenant, right? The landlord who doesn't live in the property is not playing loud music. The tenant is playing loud music, but if there is a fine issued for that, that goes to the landlord, not the tenant who played the loud music. If a tenant puts a garbage out in a non-blue garbage bag, the property owner gets cited, not inherently, or at least up front, the tenant, him or herself. So good points all around. I definitely am in agreement with all of you on that. I agree. Anything else that anyone want to add? I know we're coming up on an hour and a half here. So
I do think though, we can put like a new renter page on our website. These are the things that customarily occur, some type of resource, because even when we change our branch and tree pickup day, if you don't have that card on the refrigerator, people are on Nextdoor asking, what day is it? When are we shifting? And they go back to the website because they know that they can find it. However, if you're new to town, you may not know. And as long as it's Googleable, searchable, then perhaps that will help people walk through the stages as a new renter in the community. This is what we like. This is our new tenant, new resident, period. Welcome to the community. Bags are here. These are the dates, just tidbits, something.
definitely, absolutely. I made note of that in the minutes as well. Thank you. Anyone have anything else? We are coming within 2-3 minutes now of the end of an hour and a half. Anything else? Well, I want to, Mr. President, please.
Something completely unrelated. I don't know if everybody just saw, I just think I mentioned, since at least 6 of us are here, it appears that the next 2 sets of meetings plus a special meeting in the middle of July will be allowed to be remote per the governor's extension of the state of emergency. I just thought I'd mention it since we all happen to be right here. So that's the meetings, the work session the 21st, the business meeting the 22nd, work session on the 5th, the business meeting on the 6th, then either the 11th or the 12th, we're going to have a special meeting for the CDBG budget. So I just thought, I thought everybody might have seen that, but since we're all here, I figured I'd just mention that real quick.
I didn't. How far was it extended?
It's July 14th, a month.
Oh, 1 month. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. The governor's been typically, if she reorders ups these, it's usually within 30-day increments, if I remember correctly. Yeah.
So one of these days, maybe we'll be all back, but apparently we're delayed another month. So.
Got it. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you.
Anything else? All right. Thank you to my fellow colleagues, Councilwoman Rezanetti and Councilwoman Riley. And I want to thank Mr. President, Councilwoman Friedman, Councilman Burns, Corp Counsel for joining us. I will brush up, bullet point the minutes from this meeting, and I already have the last one. Give me like a day or so, and I will get that out to everyone by email, through email, forgive me. And then Mr. President just dropped off, but maybe at the next work session, we can all look at our calendars for scheduling the meeting 3, which would be covering code models and rental registry, and then go from that point. So with that being said, thank you everyone for your input, for the robust conversation. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Second.
Wait, no. Prior
Please.
to that, yes, before we move to have the meeting on code and rental registry, I think we need some background data because there's been a lot of discussions about our rental registry that exists. So I don't want us to come and have to rehash what is already out there, what's on our website. If we can have some background data as to, is it enforceable based upon what's on the website? And then we can go from there. I know Brian has been having a lot of discussions about it. I think it was Brian, right? Councilwoman Friedman, someone. You're muted.
I had spoken, I think I had spoken to Chris Schleider about.
Okay, sorry,
rental
wrong
reg-
name.
Maybe,
Sorry,
was
sorry.
it? Yeah,
It was me.
Brian's shaking his head.
I don't think it was me.
okay, no, I think it was Chris Schleider maybe is who I was talking to about
Okay,
it.
just so we can come to the meeting ready with what we already have versus going through that and then saying, well, this doesn't work, this doesn't work. So we
Are
know what our
there-
parameters are.
Councilwoman Riley, I'm sorry to interrupt you. If the MPA committee has any targeted questions or requests for data polls, please send them to Brian and myself, and we will try and get you that data as well in advance of the meeting as possible.
Yes.
That way we can answer the specific questions you have without, I think, having, again, you're right, kind of rehash some of the stuff council already knows.
And Mr. Clerk, I'd like to make a formal request. Could you please do some research and find whatever is in the city code with respect to rental registry and email that out to the body? So we have that, so we don't have to reread all that stuff, or rather, forgive me, we can reread it ahead of time and then go from there.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Anything else? Motion?
I move that we adjourn the meeting.
Second?
Thank you,
Motion.
Councilman Scaringi, for everything.
Thank you, sir. Motioned by Councilwoman Riley, seconded by Councilman Burns. We are adjourned. Have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Good night.
Bye.